if you all don't mind. And then hopefully that way they can get it later and watch it at a different time. But it's so good to be with you all this morning. We've had a lot of stuff going on here. I am in the Oakland East Bay area. You've probably heard on the news the last couple of days. There have been a lot of things happening here in Oakland, not all of them very good. So pray for thoughts and prayers for all the folks out here who are dealing with the issues that have cropped up. And I'm so glad, though, to be with you all this morning. It invigorates me. A quick introduction and we'll jump right into it. My name is Kareem Weaver. I am a co-founder for FULCRUM, which is Full and Complete Reading is a Universal Mandate, as well as a member of the Oakland NAACP's Education Committee, and longtime educator, teacher, principal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've been around in Mulberry Bush a few times, so I'm really, really glad to be with you all this morning. And thank you for choosing this and for sticking with it. So let's jump right into it. I will be using the chat. So if you don't mind, make sure that you have that feature available to you because we're going to be using it a little bit today. All right. A mindset for success. Very quickly in the chat, if you don't mind, I would love to start off by just getting a sense of who's in the room. So what I'd love you to do is I'd like for you to just, in the chat feature, if you can, write down where you see yourself professionally 5 years from now. What role, what job, what path are you taking? 5 years. What do you think? If you would just take a moment and put that in the chat, that will inform some of the things I say today and give us all a sense of where each other is at. I see, oh, Cynthia, teacher, okay. I hear you, Ann, retired, but volunteering. Okay, case manager, elementary school teacher, after school program, preschool. They're rolling in parole officer, occupational therapist, CTE teacher. Interesting. Preschool director. Fabiola, in what capacity would you be working in Stockton Unified? Thank you, Maria. 5 years from now, I see myself as a preschool teacher. Anyone else really quickly before we roll in? So it sounds like most of you, and it's okay if you still want to add some things there, that's fine, go right ahead. Most of you have your eyes set on some sort of a role in education, which is great, absolutely great. And I want to encourage you today. Partly the reason why I chose this topic is because sometimes we think, well, this is, this isn't for me, or this is for those individuals who, have a certain credential or who have a certain profile, emotional, political, neurodiverse, what have you. And so part of what I want to do today is let you know that what we in education really need is a certain mindset. It's a certain mindset. And that cuts across a lot of different ideologies, backgrounds, et cetera. We need you. And we need a diversity of mindsets. I'll explain to you as I go why that's so important. Okay, let me get started. I said a little bit about my background earlier, and thank you all for populating that chat. I appreciate it. Now, I got a few questions for you. I'm going to run through some things. When we think about success, when we think about what are the qualities that make someone successful, there are a lot of different beliefs about that. There's a whole school of thought. You can go to any HR director and they'll tell you, hey, this is what you should be looking for when you're hiring somebody. Or to a lender who says, listen, a loan will be successfully mature if the person can, fulfill their business plan, et cetera. But this is the profile of that individual. And so let's get into what makes someone successful. I'll skip past this. We don't have time for that. So first of all, this may seem a little bit weird, but where are we right now? What do we need? So if this was the Stone Age, right? I've said this before. If this were the Stone Age, then the majority of us would be figuring out how to get our hands on what? Some stone, right? We'd do whatever we could to be a miner or some sort of a quarry builder, whatever. Because that's the coin of the realm. But that was then. It was a different age, right? The Paleolithic, I won't get too far into all that again, well, time expediency, but where are we now? Now, today, we're in the information age. Everybody knows this. You have a computer in your hand, probably, and on your desk, right? By virtue of the phone, which is a little mini computer, and the laptop that you're probably using, right? So you have access to technology that hasn't been had in the past. And information is at your fingertips. So what are the implications of that? What does that mean? It's one thing to have access to information. It's another thing to be able to process it and to think about it and use it to make decisions. So I'm going to start really quickly today because I'm going to dig into literacy and reading and why this is such an important topic. From what I gather, having spoken to some of the organizers of this event, there are a lot of different profiles of learners here. Folks have a variety of experiences. There was a great thinker who passed away a few years back. And she said this. She said that the elimination of illiteracy is as serious to us today as the abolition of slavery. It's as important to our history as a country and as a people and as residents. So the implications of that means we are desperate to find people who can help us fight this battle. This battle of illiteracy has been going on in this country since the beginning of the United States, but particularly since 1831. I won't go into that history right now, but this is a serious issue. And she said, I would read and I would teach people to read because that's how important this is. Okay, well, what makes a person an expert? Many of you are thinking, well, in order for me to be a teacher and a good teacher, I've got to become an expert in this. I've got to figure out the nuts and bolts of how to be a professional and how to, walk through lessons, my pedagogy, and all the rest. I'm going to go to school and I'll train, I'll learn. So let me ask you some questions. If you wanted to know, who do you think would be considered an expert for starting a fire? How would you know who's an expert at starting a fire? How would you know? How would you know who an expert is in building a house? Would you go to Amazon and look up the author of House Building Today? Who gets to wear that title? Because one of the things I want to make sure we impress upon you today is we need you in the field, and the idea that only those who are experts can enter or should be considered or should want to pursue that field, I challenge that today. That we become expert in a thing and that we should become proficient in it before we begin, the final act of actually delivering instruction. But what makes somebody an expert? Well, the last one there, How to Shoot a Ball, is a basketball book. And there's a guy named Bob Fisher who wrote that book. Now, I'm sure Bob is a great guy. I don't know Bob. I've never met Bob, but he wrote this book. He says, a game-changing new approach to basketball shooting. That's what Bob says. And Bob literally wrote the book. Does that make him an expert? I'm curious what you would say to answer that question. What makes someone an expert? Now, and most of us know who this gentleman is, in the Bay Area. He plays basketball for a living, and he shoots the ball well. Steph Curry is known to be a phenomenal basketball shooter. But what makes him an expert as opposed to Bob? Bob literally wrote the book. Steph just plays games. Who's the expert? And when we talk about literacy and education and becoming a teacher, and who are the experts? And remember the topic of this. Let me go back to this now. What is the mindset needed for success? What is it that we want in an expert? Well, with no slights or offense given to Bob, I'm sure Bob's a great guy. And I'm sure that he has done, great things with his book. However, I submit to you today, and if you had to package it all in one quick little nugget, I would say it's the ability to do the thing. It's the ability to communicate the thing as you're doing it to others so that they can do it with you. So Steph's an expert not because he wrote a book. I mean, he could probably write a book, but because he's actually shot the ball. And he works with others while he's shooting the ball to move the team forward. In education, it's the same way. It's not that we're asking you to become, or that we're looking for one particular profile, but we're looking for someone who's willing to do the work. We're looking for someone who's willing to practice enough so they become an expert in the doing. Same thing for starting a fire, same thing for building a house, same thing for shooting a ball. My grandfather built homes in Chicago for years. He'd only graduated from 3rd grade, but he was an expert home builder because he could do the thing. He was able to read about it, learn about it, and then begin to do it. I'm going to be quick based on our time limitations for this, but very quickly, actually, I'm going to go back to this. It's important to start here. If you don't get anything else from this, do not let anyone tell you you're not qualified to become an expert in a thing. No one is born an expert. Experts are developed, cultivated, and grown. It's a result of practice, of diligence, and leveraging their own framing, their own experiences as they begin to develop their practice. That may sound simple. That means that Professor so-and-so, if they're teaching reading, should be able to say, well, I taught reading for this number of years and the kids were successful. That's why I'm in front of you today. That's why I'm an expert. But just because you're Dr. So-and-so doesn't make you an expert. I don't know, I may be stepping on somebody's toes with that, but that's just what it is. All right, let's keep it moving. So in education and in a lot of fields right now, there's a belief that we should be communicating indirectly, right? We should talk about things. We should allow people to experience their own learning and evolve towards understanding or realizing some greater truth. This is in math, this is in reading, this is in science, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of a Piagetian way of it's constructivist. And it's very, very popular. The reason why diversity matters in our field and why I started with the framing that I did is because research shows, now I'll share that with you in just a minute, that actually people interpret this different. For example, this indirect style of communication, there may be an educator who says, wouldn't you like to sit down? And that will be experienced as being more refined. Do you think you should raise your hand first? What do you think about, getting here at 8:30 instead of 8:35? What do you think about it? It's an indirect, and in many places they consider it to be more refined. Like that is more nuanced, more honorable, and even perceived by some as being more intelligent. Contrast that with others or a different style of communication that's more direct. Oftentimes in academia and in schools, it's considered to be rude or blunt and unrefined. Oh my goodness, that's inappropriate. How could you just say that directly like that? A teacher who tells a child, sit down, as opposed to, wouldn't you like to sit down? In many ways, some people would think that person is mean. What I submit to you today again is that we need all kinds of folks with different communication styles. Because culturally, in many of our schools, students respond to a more direct form of communication. And oftentimes it's not matched with some of the people, some of the adults who are doing the communicating. So let's do this quick little activity, okay? So here's a statement. I'm going to ask you to kind of fill it in. Indirect or passive voice or instruction, where you use the cultural agreement. So for example, the reason why I can say, do you think you want to sit down, is because you and I agree that that's more refined. The reason why I can say, sit down, and you not be offended is because you and I agree that that's okay. It's a cultural agreement and a norm. And it's based on mutual respect, okay? So indirect or passive voice in those norms, leveraging the cultural agreements and norms as a basis of mutual respect, is what to our kids? What would you fill in that blank? Indirect instruction is blank for our kids. It's how is it treating the kids? Is it respectful of our kids? Is it edifying? Is it loving? Is it caring? Is it mean? Like what is this? So we ask many people this question. Many educators who are in the process of learning. Again, I worked for a group that trained principals and trained teachers throughout the Western United States. And we had an opportunity to engage many, many teachers and principals. And so we asked this question, what do you think? And they said, well, the key word there is implicit, meaning you don't say it, you just kind of imply it. And that is, it's kind of, people get confused by that. So let's put it this way. Indirect instruction and or the deferential voice, which leverages cultural norms on the basis of mutual respect, blank our kids. What is that? It just so happens that the people answering that question answer differently based on their backgrounds. And this is why I'm saying we need all kinds of folks. And this is not to cast aspersions on any one ethnic group, or it just shows that within different groups, they perceive different forms of communication, different learning styles, et cetera, differently. They experience communication and instruction differently. Those who've primarily been rooted in a white culture said that passive voice is an attempt to be respectful. It honors our kids. It embraces them. It affirms them. It engages them. There was some who said it confuses our kids. But I put a star next to one that I think is really interesting. Some folks said, when you're indirect and use the passive voice, it's a way of giving control to someone. That's respectful. This is what many educators thought, who were reared primarily in a white culture. Now, it doesn't mean that they were Black or white. It means they were raised in that culture. You could have been Black, but reared in a white culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then there were folks who were reared primarily in a Black or Hispanic culture. And they said this, that using the passive voice, wouldn't you like to sit down? To whereas some may have thought it was affirming and respectful, these folks thought it was humiliating and disrespectful. Listen, this just goes to show you that we can be in the same place at the same time and think two completely different things based upon our backgrounds. Some even went so far as to say it's manipulative. Others did say, yes, it relaxes the person, but others says it frustrates and annoys the heck out of kids. And that's something. I see Monica, because what Monica's saying and others, and Michael, my goodness, I should bring you guys in the conversation right now. Michael said it may be seen as patronizing. or patronizing. You know, I can tell you, like, I'm not white, but I can tell you that usually, now I know there are microaggressions, absolutely, but most often people who are communicating in a more passive, indirect style, they don't mean to be patronizing. Again, I understand there are microaggressions, and I know some people are sitting here saying, yeah, they know what they're doing, but let's just give people the benefit of the doubt and say we're communicating with positive intentions. We want to get kids to do something and to do it in a respectful manner, and this is the communication style people have been reared in. And so it's important to lay this out, because what we really need as an education is a bridge. There will be some adults who have the communication style on the left, some on the right. There will be students who have the communication style on the left, some on the right. And that's fine. But the preponderance, the greatest number of our educators, based upon the surveys that we've given, that I've given, and with new leaders when I was ED there, tend to be on the left. That they see it as a loving, respectful, kind thing to do. We need people who are diverse, not just in skin color, but in communication style. Because what works for one child may not work for the next. Well, what classroom can you go to if everyone's doing the same thing? And on the right-hand side, we also need people who have that kind of communication style, regardless of the culture in which they were reared. Again, I did not say Black or Hispanic people. I said those raised in a Black or Hispanic culture. Kareem, we usually don't talk about this stuff. What are you doing, man? You're messing it up, everybody. Monica says that's why it's important to know your students. And yes, Michael, I agree. It could come off that way. It doesn't mean the person's intentions was this. We don't know what the person's intentions are. However, it's how the children experience it that matters most. But we're just saying that it's important to have a diversity of communication styles and that it matches the kids. Now, there are some of us, some adults who believe that how we say things is important, but what we actually say matters more. Do you think that? Or do you think how we say it matters? I mean, I'm sure they both matter, but which matters more? Because some adults believe the what we say matters more. And because some believe the opposite, right? There's some who believe the how matters more, some believe that the what we say matters more. I mean, listen, I know people who, they will tone police you on their deathbed. And there are others who say, listen, I'm from New York City. I don't care how you say it, just tell me, just give it to me. It just depends. But also because students, as well as teachers, are diverse. And again, not necessarily, I mean, yes, ethnically, but there's also these other things. The gender disparity. In education right now, 90% of educators are women. Yet the students are 50-50. So sometimes there is a communication, there's some dissonance based on a host of factors. Maybe it's a regional dispersion as teachers come from other locations. They may have come from the Northeast. I mentioned earlier a teacher from Boston or New York City coming to California, which is definitely a different culture. Or socioeconomic disparity or linguistic. So there are all these things. Because of that, it's more important than ever to provide direct instruction. Meaning, because of this diversity, we have to be able to say what we mean. We have to be able to communicate across and through our differences. And that's why I titled this conversation or this talk the way I did, because people need to know that is your number one skill, to be able to communicate in the way the students need to hear it. It just so happens that a gentleman named John Hattie did research on what helps kids learn. What are the different variables? I don't know if you all have covered Hattie before, but he did lots of research, and his team did a meta-analysis, meaning they did research of the research. And ultimately, the studies combined to have over 300 million kids. That's a lot of kids. Those are a lot of projects. And they found that this explicit aspect of teaching is pretty doggone important. Anything above 2, 5 or so is deemed to be a high impact strategy. That direct instruction matters. Let's keep moving. In fact, direct instruction mattered much more than some of the things that we in education talk about all the time. So the ability to just be direct and tell people exactly and explicitly what you mean is probably the most important skill that a person can have. Now, let's actually, I'll skip this one. So here is a metaphor I like to give to you. We talked about direct instruction. If you were building some steps, you were a carpenter, and your job was to build some steps to get to the second level of the building. How would you build the steps? What would you do? What approach would you take? I mean, this is kind of a rhetorical question. You don't have to put this one in the chat. But the thinking is, what would best serve the function of getting people to the top of the steps? Okay. There's some things that you'd consider. Before you just started building, you'd have to ask yourself some questions. You'd probably ask, how many people am I trying to get up the steps? Is it just one at a time, right? Or am I trying to get up 2 people? Or is it 50 people or 500 people? Do they all go to? So you have to kind of know that before you start your plan. What's the mobility of the people? If I'm building it for me, I'm getting a little old now. Those steps can't be too far apart because I can't run like I used to. I can't do what I used to do. So what's the mobility of the people? Do they see very well? What's their eyesight like? I'll come back to that one later. Their endurance. Are they going to get tired if I build it too steeply? If it's too steep, some people will run out of gas. Some I may have to actually just inch by inch, a little bit at a time, and they'll be able to get there. And how important is it that they make it to the top? And what's our goal? So these are the type of, listen, I don't think anyone has to go to graduate school to think about it. I think this is common sense, I would think, right? If I'm building steps, I need to know these things. It's the same thing in education with literacy. Right? Yes, we're thinking about the number of people and the mobility and the vision, et cetera, and endurance. And the goal, I think, is to get as many people to the top of the steps as possible. That means people with all communication styles, all linguistic backgrounds. That means people with different, with varying different home lives and all the different mitigating factors that we have in our lives, that the goal is to get a lot of them to the top of the steps. But what if you also knew that there were some people that get up pretty easily? And you knew that, regardless of what you do, there's going to be like 40 people are going to be okay regardless of what you do. Then you got another 60% that you really have to take your time and build it out. You have to, one step at a time. You cannot skip steps. Some people have depth and perception problems. They might get distracted, television might be on. Like are you building it for the 40% or are you building it for the 60%, those second, the third and fourth group? That is an important consideration. If you're trying to get everybody to the top, which group should you focus on? I think most of us would agree, I would hope, that if you're going to get everybody up to the top, you got to get that bottom 60% up. The top 40%, they're going to get there regardless. I mean, you can help them, obviously, but you got to intentionally plan for that 60%. And to do that, it's best to have somebody who understands them as part of the build. What do I mean by that? As you think about how to design the steps, if I'm a little older now, I'm probably going to build the steps so that I can make it, because I know what it's like to be old. And no offense for those of you who are 25 and 27 years old, like, you don't know what it's like to wake up and have your knees just hurt for no reason. You don't know that. So when I build the steps, I'm going to build it for something that works for me, but that will also work for you. Does that make sense? In education, it's very, very similar. So for example, I'll just go with this example a little bit further. We are trying to construct schools of education, K-12, kindergarten, first, second, third. We're trying to construct programs that are going to get the greatest number of kids where they need to go in education. How should we build the programs? Who should we build them for? Who should our architects and our builders be? Should they all be people who think the same, talk the same, act the same? But the bubble, if they were reared in the bubble, they went to school in the bubble, and now they're a bubble teacher. Meaning that's the perspective. But what if there's a student who does things differently? They're a more direct communicator. That's one of our biggest challenges in education. Is why I implore you all today to consider education and to consider the fact that your diversity, your individual diversity, can be our sector's greatest strength. Your job isn't necessarily to conform to what everybody else is the manner in which they're doing things. The content is the content, but how you do it might be unique, and your journey to get where you are might be unique, but it'll give you insight and perspective that allows you to do something that can get the greatest number of kids to the top, because you can communicate in a different way than the folks who've just been in the bubble the whole time. If I had to build these steps, I'd go for probably C, just because, like, look, man, I'm about 50. Like, I can't do the whole eighth. Listen, there was a time I could do it, but not now, right? And for B, I'm afraid I'd fall off. And here's the thing: oftentimes in schools, those of us who are in charge, Marta, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Wow, I really should be looking at this chat more. There's some really fascinating conversation going on. You know, most school systems have slogans, or those, what do they call them? Mission statements or vision statements. You know, there's always something. And it's very good talk. All students will receive a high quality, you know, we strive. If I put it in the metaphor of the Stairmasters, it would be, we will create opportunities for all climbers to be successful and master to reach the second floor. So, you know, hashtag all climbers matter. Like, we as adults tend to do that. We tend to put the nobility of our goals on display for all to see. But oftentimes, our signs don't match what we're doing. Our audio doesn't match our video, as a friend of mine used to say. Really quickly, I won't be too much longer. I know time is getting a little short. This is actually a graphic to represent how we read, or how we acquire the skill of reading. There's about 40% of kids and adults who are going to learn to read pretty much regardless, right? With broad instruction, meaning you can teach it any number of ways. Then there's 40 to 65% of people who it's going to be tough. They need it systematic, explicit, sequential. They need it direct. They may have dyslexia. You see the graphic there, 10 to 15% of the population, some would say as high as 20%, but have dyslexia, meaning they're going to need all of that in a structured way, and they're going to need some diagnostic support. Now, the overwhelming majority of our educators are in this top 40%, this green part. And they can't even perceive of what the problem is. You go around the country and you ask them what the proficiency rates are for their third graders, and they'll tell you, well, somewhere between 25 and 40%. The overwhelming majority of districts are right there. And the data doesn't lie. These folks are not the teachers. They don't make it through the system. They don't navigate it. They get tripped up. These folks run the system. These 35 to 40% of folks, they run it. And so they create systems. They get curriculum. They do trainings. They teach classes that works for them. They speak a certain way. They use certain theories. They emphasize certain methods. They inspire certain pedagogy. But it's rooted in what worked for them. We need diversity of the mind. We need people who maybe it was tough for them. Maybe it was hard to learn to read. We desperately need some of these folks to be teachers. We desperately need some of these people to become teachers. If we want to get the greatest number of people up to the top step, we have to have a diversity of the mind. I'm not talking about just linguistic diversity or how somebody looks or their skin color. That's all fine. I'm talking about how we learn. How did you learn to read? If it was hard for you, we need you 3 times as much. If you had to learn it in a sequential way, we're desperate for you. If you don't remember how you learned to read, if it came pretty easy, that's what most educators, nothing wrong with that. We need those folks too. You got to be able to communicate to all folks. But to be clear, for everyone here on this call, I want you to know we have a place for you in education. We need you, especially if you're neurodiverse. I won't go into that. We don't have time. But what I will say is that this is part of social justice. Social justice isn't just a bumper sticker. It's our ability to provide individuals what they need to succeed in society. This is the information age. And every 30 years or so, there's a new wave of social justice, beginning in 1830 with Nat Turner's rebellion, and going through every 30 years or so, the Department of Education for the United States was created in the 80s. Some of you weren't born in the 80s. I understand that makes me old. It's okay. I was in 3rd grade when that happened. I remember it. And yeah, it's a cycle. Well, we're on the next cycle right now. And at FULCRUM and with the Oakland NAACP, what we're saying is the next cycle of social justice is literacy. But the only way we're going to get there is if we have enough people with neurodiversity, with different learning backgrounds, folks who see things differently, who can communicate effectively with students. We can teach you the nuts and bolts, but there's some things that are cultural that people just bring to the table when they have their authentic self. And we need that. We're desperate for that to be able to match up and meet the needs of students. Again, educators, our motives are noble. The question is, does our audio match our video? Are we bringing our full self to the table? When we say all are welcome, so equity and social justice means that everybody is enabled, inspired, and prepared to get to the top. And that requires a diversity of mind and thought and communication styles and backgrounds to be able to connect with, motivate, inspire, and move the students where they need to go. I won't do that. I won't play that. Instead, I'll just say very quickly that I often end with this gentleman here. I don't know if you all recognize this man. Some people do. Some people may. But that's Ambassador Andy Young. He was Dr. King's good friend. This is his buddy. And I've had the opportunity to get to know him. And he let me know that, look, social justice, you have to look at it like the Statue of Liberty. He said everyone gets inspired by the torch, but really you got to go after the feet to unchain people. And today's conversation is all about unchaining. We need diversity, and not just, and listen, I love diversity, is beautiful, physical diversity, but we need intellectual diversity. We need communication diversity. We need diversity of the mind and of thought and of culture. Who's going to talk to those children in a direct way and have it be undergirded with love so that they can hear it and receive it? Who's going to do that when we have a very narrow group of folks who have navigated this system successfully? But he said today's challenge is unshackling the feet on the Statue of Liberty. That's our challenge. And I'll end with this again from Mother Maya, who was very clear that this challenge, education and specifically literacy, it is as important today as the abolition of slavery was at that time. And with that, I'm going to stop and open it up for questions and comments. Gabby, I see you've got a big, huge notebook there. You must have a ton of questions. But for anyone, if you have a question, feel free to either put it in the chat or raise your hand with the clicker, and we can be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And Eliza, if you wouldn't mind helping me out, I know some people have already asked questions and made comments, and that's fine. But I'll respond. But if you see one, by all means, go ahead. Hello, Monica. Good to see your face.
I've been responding in the chat, and mostly people have just been giving great comments. But yeah, I think Monica, go ahead. Why don't you ask your question?
Hi, everybody. I don't know if you can hear me. If everybody can hear me, okay. I'm a school counselor. That's what I have, a PPS credential, but I work in the CTE field. And just speaking of the mindset, you kind of just blew me away right now, because I've been in education for almost 20 years, and I never once realized that the Statue of Liberty has chains on her feet. I'm looking it up on my second computer right now, and I'm blown away, because what you said is we focus on the torch. And as an educator, I think I pride myself on focusing on that torch. I want my kids to do great. I want to, see them succeed. But I was just blown away at the fact that she's got chains there, and I have to break those chains before my kids will be able to succeed. So thank you for your presentation, but I just kind of wanted to put myself out there too and say that maybe we have to address our own vulnerabilities so that our children can address theirs, and we move forward together. So thank you so much for just helping me to have that eye-opening experience. Thank you.
My pleasure. You're welcome. And you're absolutely right. The key to all of this is vulnerability. And so there's two sides of that. So many of us, and I did see someone in the chat say that they're neurodiverse. Phenomenal. That means either they have some sort of a learning difference, or they process things a little bit differently than someone else. That's exactly what we need. Exactly what we need. So there's a level of vulnerability. So it's two sides of the coin. It's being vulnerable enough to be you. The education sector specializes in kind of molding people into one form, into one way of doing things. Right? We need you to talk like this, act like this. This is how you do your classroom management. Listen, when I went to teacher credentialing program, they taught us how to make rules. You're supposed to post the rules up on the board and all that. I never put rules in my classroom. I walked into the class and I said, you know how to act. I want you to act the way your grandparents want you to act. That's what I want you to do, because I trust them. And if yours are anything like mine, you don't have to put it on the wall. It's in my heart. Never had a problem. Never had a problem. And people are like, how could you not have the rule? I was communicating to them in a way I knew they understood. It wasn't probably traditional, but But that goes for a lot of things. How we communicate to kids matters. Yes, the technical stuff is important. You have to know how to do the things, and yes, and we're different. We come from different cultures and backgrounds, and we have to be able to talk to kids in a way that they get it. So yeah, so that's one side is that. On the other side, what I realized was you got to be bold. So humility, but also boldness. You're good enough. You can do it. Whether you are neurodiverse or not, it's a matter of diligence and preparation. Some of us may have to work harder than others to be able to learn the thing and do the thing and whatever, and communicate the thing and grade the thing, sure. But do not think for 1 second that there is one archetype for an instructor. I taught for a long time. I was good at it. I was teacher of the year. I did all that. Principal of the year. I did all that. And you know what? I probably did it a little bit differently than others. And that's okay. In fact, I will go so far as to say it's necessary. We're desperate to get out of the just, oh my gosh, who was your teacher? I don't know. She's probably the same as the last teacher. We actually need people who have the diversity of personality and all the rest. So yeah, those things are really important. I'm glad that surprised me too. When Andrew Young told me about it, I didn't know, but he said his generation's job was to light the torch. He said it's our job to go after the feet.
Kareem, okay. Do you want to answer one more question? I feel like there's a really good question from Mara. Mara asked, how do you think schools are approaching this nowadays? And I think what she meant is what you said about direct or indirect instruction, and we'll take it however you want. Or Mara, please clarify if you would like.
Hello, Mara. I don't see Mara.
Oh, maybe.
Oh, I do, Mara Benitez.
Yes.
Well, I'll answer the question based on what I think it meant.
Yes.
Oh, she says yes, mostly that. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Schools are doing terribly at it. Terribly. And the reason why we're doing terribly at it is because most people in schools are there, most, not all, most of them are there because things worked for them. They tend to communicate in the same style. They tend to reading probably came easy for them. They're probably indirect with their communication. Yeah, there may be some people who slip through the cracks. Sure, that's right. But the majority of them, you know, it's a bubble. And so how do you then take a group that is in a bubble and get them to and get them to understand and be accepting of and accommodating? Like, how are you going to reach everybody if you only have people with one profile? You have to have others who bring diversity, not just color and not just language, but culture, communication, etc. And the teacher ed programs tend to recruit and teach and retain folks who have a certain profile. It just is what it is. So they're not doing very good at it. And that's why many of our children, the 60% who need something different, are oftentimes not being served. The communication just isn't there. In fact, well, I won't go too far into it, but it's a challenge. That's why we need diversity in the field. And that's why we need people. I heard teachers say, yeah, I kind of struggled in school, so I wouldn't be a good teacher. Actually, no, that's the opposite. If you're willing to work, right, and be diligent at your craft, you actually are the very person that some kid needs. And there are a lot of those kids, but there's no one with whether it's your neurodiverse profile, whether it's your communication style, whether it's your culture or linguistic background, whatever it is, there's only one you. And we need people who can reach all kids. That means we got to have a diversity of learners if we're going to get, of educators, if we're going to get people in mass up to the top of the steps. There is, thank you, Laura Lynn. You can come on and explain that if you'd like. See that passive voice? Laura Lynn, would you please explain?
Yeah. So I know some of you are looking for certificates kind of from your instructors, kind of you're taking this course. And so I just dropped in from Kareem the certificate for that you can get them.
And I also dropped in a evaluation that Teach for the Bay would love for you to fill out about this session or all the sessions that you attend. Either way is fine, they said.
Right. Now look, I made fun of it, what I just did, but it's exactly the whole point. Listen, I said that because, I don't know, that's kind of what you do. I'm in the thing, right? I'm in the bubble. And she's a white lady. And that's kind of what you got to do if you like to do the, and and I caught myself, wait a second, I'm teaching the thing and so oftentimes, and it would have worked. I could have done it. And the communication would have been, we're adults and we get it, but kids aren't like that. Kids, if you don't communicate to them in a way that they get, they interpret it differently. If you're indirect, when they're used to it being direct, they'll think you don't like them or you're mad at them or different things. Kids think all kinds of stuff, right? We have to really work to understand our kids and their culture and give them what they need, not force our way of doing things into them. Lolan, I think there's a question about the document that you put in the chat. Oh, you're right on it. Thank you. So you all, if you need that, it's there for you. You can click that link and go to fill out the document. I'll take one more question. We're at time. If there's a quick one, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'm gonna. Gabby's like, no, that's it. Okay. Look, I really appreciate you all for hanging in here and for joining me. I know this topic is a little bit different. It's not kind of your normal thing, but I think it's important. You're good enough. We actually need your personality, your profile, your neurodiversity, your journey, your history. It matters. And there are kids out there who they have to have it the way you do it because they're kind of coming up the same way, regardless of how they look at their background, but people have differences. And so we've got to have a diverse teaching force for that reason. There are many others, but that's a big one that we often don't talk about. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you for joining. Please make sure that you fill out the evaluation that was put in the chat. So I won't close this down for a while because I know some people probably still haven't gotten it.
Oh,
Just
excuse me?
from the chat if you need to.
Excuse me?
Is it Michael? Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that, yeah, everything you said, I haven't heard of it spoken to too much, but you're absolutely right when you say that different learning styles and other things really need to be represented more, you know? I know that like growing up, I mean, I put it in the chat, but, you know, I had trouble with social cues or whatever, and it's a matter of drama, so it's hard for me sometimes to interpret some things, and yeah, I mean, I almost failed kindergarten because I couldn't remember my home address and my phone numbers. I mean, I still didn't by the end of it, actually, but, and so I just want to say that, like, everything that you said, like, thank you for the class and everything, and that, yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. We've had many, many presidents, from Thomas Jefferson to Eisenhower to others, who were dyslexic. And we've had people like Steve Jobs, who was dyslexic, and Steven Spielberg. And we've had people who've done amazing things, but they had to get what they needed. And if they don't, then it's oftentimes not a pretty picture. But if they do, sky's the limit. So thank you, Michael, and others who joined. Appreciate you all. Please make sure you fill out this survey. And I hope to see you in the classroom sometime soon as you're on your journey. All right. Take care, you all.